During World War I, Truman commanded a battery of close support 75mm artillery pieces in France and personally witnessed the human costs of intense frontline combat. After returning home, he became convinced that he probably would have been killed if the war had lasted a few months longer. At least two of his World War I comrades had lost sons in World War II, and Truman had 4 nephews in uniform. His first-hand experience with warfare clearly influenced his thinking about whether to use the atomic bomb. A second factor in Truman's decision was the legacy of Roosevelt, who had defined the nation's goal in ending the war as the enemy's unconditional surrender, a term coined to reassure the Soviet Union that the Western Allies would fight to the end. Against Germany.It was also an expression of the American temperament. The United States was accustomed to winning war and dictating the peace. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally, to great rejoicing in the Allied countries. The hostility of the American public toward Japan was even more intense, and demanded an unambiguous total victory in the Pacific. Truman was acutely aware that the country in its 4th year of total war also wanted victory as quickly as possible. A skilled politician who knew when to compromise, Truman respected decisiveness. Meeting with Anthony Eden, the British Foreign Secretary, in early May, he declared, "I am here to make decisions, and whether they prove right or wrong I am going to make them," an attitude that implied neither impulsiveness nor solitude. After being presented with Stimson's report, he appointed a Blue Ribbon interim committee to advise him on how to deal with the atomic bomb. Headed by Stimson and James Burns, whom Truman would soon name Secretary of State, the interim committee was a group of respected statesmen and scientists closely linked to the war effort. After 5 meetings between May 9 and June 1, it recommended use of the bomb against Japan as soon as possible, and rejected arguments for advance warning. Clearly in line with Truman's inclination, the recommendations of the interim committee amounted to upper package decision. Scientists and the atomic bomb, among those who had full knowledge of the Manhattan Project to build an atomic bomb, most agreed that the weapon should be used. However, sharp dissent came from a group of scientists at the project's facilities at the University of Chicago. Their leader, Leo Szilard, along with 2 prestigious colleagues, Walter Bartkey, a dean of the University of Chicago, and Harold Urey, director of the project's research in gaseous diffusion at Columbia University, sought a meeting with Truman but were diverted to Burns, who received them with polite skepticism, as he listened to them argue that the United States should refrain from using the bomb and that it should share its atomic secrets with the rest of the world after the war. Burns felt that he was dealing with unworldly intellectuals who had no grasp of political and diplomatic realities. He neither took their suggestions seriously nor discussed them with Truman, who most likely would have shared his attitude anyway. Szilard and his associates seem to have represented only a small minority of the many hundreds of scientists who worked on the bomb project. In July 1945, project administrators polled 150 of the 300 scientists working at the Chicago site and could find only 19 who rejected any military use of the bomb and another 39 who supported an experiment. All demonstration with representatives of Japan present, followed by An opportunity for surrender. Most of the scientists, however, supported. Some use the bomb, 23 supported using it in a way that was militarily most effective. And 69 opted for a military demonstration in Japan, with an opportunity for surrender before full use of the weapons. In later years, several key figures, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower, General Douglas MacArthur, Admiral William Leahy, and Assistant Secretary of War John J. McCloy, claimed to have opposed using the bomb, but there is no firm evidence of any substantial contemporary opposition. Most of the scientists, civilian leaders, and military officials responsible for the development of the bomb clearly assumed that its military use, however unpleasant, was the inevitable outcome of the project. Although they were forced to formulate an opinion before a single bomb had been built or tested, it is unlikely that a more precise knowledge of the weapon's power would have changed many minds. Truman faced almost no pressure whatever to re-examine his own inclinations. Truman was sworn in as president on the same day as Roosevelt's death, which was just weeks away from Truman's 61st birthday. He began his presidency with great energy, making final arrangements for the San Francisco meeting to draft a charter for the United Nations, helping to arrange Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, and traveling to Potsdam in July for a meeting with Allied leaders to discuss the fate of post-war Germany. While in Potsdam, Truman received word of the successful test of an atomic bomb at Los Alamos, New Mexico, and it was from Potsdam that Truman sent an ultimatum to Japan to surrender unconditionally or face utter devastation. When Japan did not surrender and his advisors estimated that up to 500,000 Americans might be killed in an invasion of Japan, Truman authorized the dropping of atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima, August 6, and Nagasaki, August 9, killing more than 100,000 men, women, and children. This remains perhaps the most controversial decision ever taken by a U.S. president, one that scholars continue to debate today. See sidebar, the decision to use the atomic bomb. In his address to the American people on August 7, Truman said in part Japan surrendered on August 14, and the Pacific War ended officially on September 2, 1945. Later in 1947 the President-backed Secretary of State George Marshall's strategy for undercutting communism's appeal in Western Europe by sending enormous amounts of financial aid, ultimately about $13 billion, to rebuild devastated European economies. Both the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, officially the European Recovery Program, achieved their objectives, but they also contributed to the global polarization that characterized 5 decades of Cold War hostility between East and West. But Truman surprised everyone. He launched a cross-country whistle-stop campaign, blasting the do-nothing, good-for-nothing Republican Congress as he hammered away at Republican support for the anti-labor Taft-Hartley Act, passed over Truman's veto, and other conservative policies. Crowds responded with "Give 'em hell, Harry." The excitement generated by Truman's vigorous campaigning contrasted sharply with the lackluster speeches of Republican candidate Thomas E. Dewey, and Truman won by a comfortable margin, 49% to 45%. Wallace and Thurmond had little impact on the outcome. Energized by his surprising victory, Truman presented his program for domestic reform in 1949. The Fair Deal included proposals for expanded public housing, increased aid to education, a higher minimum wage, federal protection for civil rights, and national health insurance. Despite Democratic majorities in the House and Senate, most Fair Deal proposals either failed to gain legislative majorities or passed in much weakened form. Truman succeeded, however, in laying the groundwork for the domestic agenda for decades to come. Less than 2 weeks after being sworn in as president, Harry S. Truman received a long report from Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson. Within 4 months, it began, "We shall in all probability have completed the most terrible weapon ever known in human history." Truman's decision to use the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki resulted from the Interplay of his temperament and several other factors, including his perspective on the war. Objectives defined by his predecessor. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the expectations of the American public, an assessment of the possibilities of achieving a quick victory by other means, and the complex American relationship with the Soviet Union. Although in later decades there was considerable debate about whether the bombings were ethically justified, virtually all of America's political and military leadership, as well as most of those involved in the atomic bomb project, believed at the time that Truman's decision was correct. But Truman feeling bad after seeing Japanese condition of atomic bombings because big numbers of people affected. What you think on Nagasaki and Hiroshima? And please like, share and subscribe for more historic knowledge.